In life, there are certain simple, elegant truths, and here is one of them. People who are right, whose arguments are correct, who can credibly claim to be occupying the moral high ground, such people have no need to see their enemies silenced. In fact, that's the last thing they should ever want. If the facts are on your own side, if they can be supported with solid rationale, what does one stand to gain from rigging the game so that only one's own viewpoint is allowed to be heard? The answer, of course, is nothing. Which brings us to the latest invasion of the skyscreamers. When was the first big skyscramer incident, Jim Eagle? Do you remember? The day after Trump won in 2016 is the first time I remember seeing it become such a popular means of expression, particularly among unemployed baristas with purple hair and javelins through their noses. And the skyscreamers had a field day again earlier this year when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. In fact, they may still be outside Brett Kavanaugh's house right now screaming at the sky while Merrick Garland and Chris Wray bring them milk and cookies each night and tell them to keep up the great work. But at least, if you're going to do something as dumb as screaming nonsense noises at no one in particular as a means of registering your displeasure with the state of current events, then a presidential election or a landmark Supreme Court decision, those are at least major historically relevant events in the life of the nation. But you know what isn't? A guy buying a website. But don't try telling that to the skyscreamers because they are very, very upset indeed at yesterday's ostensibly shocking news that Elon Musk is, in fact, going to wind up buying stupid Twitter for the originally agreed upon price, and they might hand him the keys to the building as soon as the end of this week. My favorite thing so far about this is that some of the loudest skyscreamers, of course they're in the mainstream fake news media, on CNN and MSNBC, I think they're literally gnashing their teeth and rending their garments asunder on the air right now at the prospect that a social media site might potentially become less heavily censored. Free speech? You mean, like people saying what they want? That's an outrage! Not on my watch, good sir. This will be the end of everything. I actually have a memo for the fake news performance artists, if there happen to be any of them watching the program tonight, and you guys can take this as a bit of free, unsolicited advice. Joe Biden is currently trying to start a nuclear war with Russia. Gas is nearly $6.50 a gallon in vast stretches of the country. 5 million illegal aliens have ingressed the country in the last 19 months. Violent crime rages in our big cities. Homelessness and drug addiction are at epidemic levels. Supply chains breaking down. Chinese communists buying up our land and many of our government officials to boot. The country flooded with all manner of enemy saboteurs, and not just on the president's cabinet. There are half a dozen different world-changing calamities that could happen by tomorrow morning. So you know what really is not a good look? Acting like the worst possible thing that could happen in the world, the darkest of all eventualities, is Donald Trump being able to tweet? In fact, I'm going to say something right now that may blow your minds, Mr. and Mrs. Fake News Performance Artist. Are you ready? Here it comes. Most people don't have a Twitter account. Many people, millions of them, in fact, go their entire lives without ever doing any Twitter tweeting whatsoever. You know why? Because Twitter is fucking stupid. Also, I enjoyed their feeble attempt at having a journalistic take, which they took the time to formulate as they were having a throat lozenge in between bouts of sky screaming. All right, let's bring on Mr. Very Serious Legal Analyst to explain that Elon Musk, he got totally punked here. Played for a fool because he must have realized he was going to lose this court case, so he caved and was forced into buying the company. Okay, pal. So it's a crushing defeat that he's going to pay the same price that he said he was willing to pay in the first place. Very impressive theory. That's some hard-hitting journalism right there. Well, hard-hitting in the sense that the average viewer might injure himself from face-palming so goddamn hard. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where the sheep are scared of the dogs are scared of the horses, and they are all afraid of the women. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I'm your eponymous host and humble servant. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I'm potentially willing to end a long-standing bit of channel policy, because if Musk does indeed take over Twitter and he undoes all the political censorship that's currently in place and unbans everybody who's been banned for political reasons, then I might have to give serious consideration to ending the moratorium on this channel having a social media presence. A Twitter with no woke douchebag censor brigade? I venture to say I might be able to do some pretty good work on a Twitter like that, and the wokesters will be so easy to upset, it'll be a troll's paradise. And that's my other favorite thing about this news, by the way, is all the woke blue checkmark all-stars threatening to leave the platform if the ownership change goes through. Well, like Elon's going to be sitting in the room ready to sign the papers. He looks down at his phone and he says, "Nope. Hold up there, fellas. I just read where this idiot celebrity says he's going to leave Twitter if I buy it. We're going to have to call the whole thing off. I'm sorry." But I guess one learns to expect such things when one lives in a society where unwarranted self-importance has long since supplanted baseball as our national pastime. Which brings me to the employees of Twitter who, similarly, some of them, they are threatening to leave their jobs if the company gets sold to someone of whom they don't approve, who might potentially make policy changes that they don't like. Now, here's what I don't get about my kids' generation. Where did they get this idea that by taking a job and going to work for somebody that you are somehow doing them a favor? Better yet, where did they get the idea that individual employees are allowed to make political demands of the entire company and the CEO? Well, you better get out there and support the causes I like, Mr. CEO, or else I will threaten to quit my $18 an hour job as deputy under assistant to the vice president of wokeness and diversity. We saw that with Disney earlier this year, and amazingly, Disney actually caved to it, probably lost themselves untold billions of dollars in the process. Florida passes a law, the kind of law no sane society should ever need, but when there's this many sex perverts on the loose in the public school system, you don't really have a choice, I guess, and the law says you don't need to talk about gay porn and transgenderism in the elementary school classroom, so stop it right now. And frankly, if you get horrified by a law like that, I think you have just told me everything I need to know about your moral character, so thank you. Disney doesn't say anything about the law at first because why the hell should they? You don't get to be a beloved children's entertainment brand and a national institution by wading into every divisive state-level legislative debate, after all. You attain that status by never, ever getting your company embroiled in any sort of political anything. But the Disney workforce, which evidently is about 78% gay and trans, they were having none of it. They said, "Bob Chapek, we cannot continue in good conscience to work for a company that doesn't stand up for the solemn right of little boys, little girls, and little androgynous hermaphrodites to read all the gay porn in kindergarten that they want to read. And so if you don't come out against this awful, immoral Florida law, then damn it, we are going to resign en masse. And when we do, we're taking every mentally disordered sex pervert in your whole organization with us. So good luck keeping the lights on, sir." And I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but not by all that much. Some self-organized consortium of sex pervert Disney workers actually sent an email directly to the CEO that read pretty much like that, but less funny. A normal CEO in a sane world would have reacted first by having a good long laughing fit, at least 5 minutes. Tears flowing and everything, because that's how freaking hilarious it is that any such email should ever be sent to the chief executive of a huge multinational company by a group of middling mid-level employees with prominent neck tattoos. But what does Chapek do? Well, he snaps a salute and says, "Yes, sir, right away, sir." And I'm going to stop and digress here for a moment, because if we're going to trans the military, as the current DOD leadership seems very intent upon doing, then aren't we going to need another option in addition to sir and ma'am that subordinates can use to address their superiors? After all, if my commanding officer identifies as a gender non-binary rainbow unicorn fairy, then how am I supposed to respectfully address that person when I am rendering my salute? Because yes, you magnificent gender non-binary rainbow unicorn fairy, you, it seems a bit long. frankly. Valuable time could be lost on the battlefield if that is the standard form of address, is all I'm saying. And now I need to digress off of the previous digression because there was a thing that happened last week and I couldn't talk about it because I was serving out my sentence in the YouTube sin bin. But it's a story you may have seen. Alaska Airlines has announced that it is doing away with all wardrobe gender requirements for pilots and flight crew. In other words, in the new, more enlightened world of tomorrow, your airline pilot will start the day by rolling out of bed, petting the cat, walking over to the closet, and asking out loud, "What kind of pilot do I want to be today? Do I want to be the kind of pilot who wears trousers or the kind who wears a dress?" Now, I'm a person who will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid airports and airplanes, and that was true even before all the Kung Flu madness, and I'm scheduled to take a flight in a little more than 2 weeks from now, which will be my first in 3 years. And I am telling you right goddamn now, if I ingress that aircraft and the pilot who welcomes me on board is a dude wearing a skirt and pantyhose that plane, I will be damned if it is leaving the ground with me on it. Now I realize it's quite fashionable in the current cultural moment to pretend that swapping out your gender is something perfectly healthy and normative that doesn't evince any sort of mental illness. But that's a lie. Men who wear women's clothing in public, irrespective of their reason for doing it, are mentally disordered, and very profoundly so. There is nothing ignorant or bigoted or much less transphobic about saying that. It simply is a fact about the world, a fact that nobody disagreed on up until about 5 minutes ago, and they will go back to not disagreeing about it 5 minutes from now, and the wacky transgenderism craze of the early 2020s will stand for all time as a monument to what it really is, an embarrassing moment of cultural mass hysteria that we never snapped out of until sufficient numbers of us started asking, do we want to live in a society where it's legal and socially acceptable to hack off the breasts, the healthy breasts of an adolescent girl, or to chemically or surgically castrate an adolescent boy just so we can make a sacrifice on the altar of fashionable identity politics? Matt Walsh, in particular, has been doing yeoman's work of late exposing the motives and the practices of this evil, evil cult. First, Boston University got exposed for doing Frankensteinian gender mutilations on minor children. Then Vanderbilt University got exposed, and that one was even better because in that case, there's an actual video of the department head at the hospital giving a talk to the staff saying, we really, really need to push these gender surgeries because they make a huge amount of money for the hospital, so get out there and do it. And of course they say that because, of course, that's the motivation for the whole thing. Once you get a teen boy or a teen girl through the turnstile of gender-affirming healthcare, you just hooked a big fish that's going to stay on the line forever. Once they write that first prescription for the hormones or the puberty blockers, they have got you. You'll be back in that office at least once a month for the remainder of your natural-born life. So it's quite the irony, don't you think, that uncritical acceptance of transgenderism is part of the political agenda for people who think they hate capitalism. Because is there any better example of rampant capitalism run amok than the fact that you've got a whole subculture of the medical profession that is so obsessed with maximizing profit they want to convince parents that slicing off healthy body parts off their children just because there's potentially a lot of money in it? They like to use innocuous-sounding terms and phrases to describe this stuff, gender-affirming care and all that. But when you start getting into a detailed discussion of what's actually being done and who's doing it and why they're doing it, affirmation is not the emotion you're most likely to feel. Assuming, of course, that you're a sane person with a functioning soul who thinks maiming children is bad. The emotion you're most likely to feel is revulsion, because it's a very deeply revolting thing, and 10 or 20 years from now, we will have to answer, all of us, for why we allowed an environment to exist where this stuff was being done to children and it wasn't against the law. We should be ashamed of ourselves, and that is a good and proper thing. Because there's going to be a lot of adults walking around with their lives and their futures ruined, their bodies permanently disfigured because we, as a society, allowed this monstrous thing to be done to them. Just because some hospitals and some insurance companies wanted to make a shitload of money. They are going to ask us for an explanation, and they will be well entitled to one because we will have failed in the most solemn responsibility that the adult generation has toward its children, and that is, we don't allow them to make permanently life-altering decisions, and we don't make permanently life-altering decisions for them because each person has the right to make such choices for him or herself after reaching adulthood. If you own a tattoo shop, and a 15-year-old kid walks in and you put a tattoo on him, you've broken the law in all 50 states in the Union, and you're probably going to jail depending on which state you happen to live in. And as a practical matter, what is the difference between the tattoo shop and the transgender medicine clinic at the fancy university hospital? If you can't put a tattoo on the kid under penalty of law, how can it be legal to chemically castrate him and lop off his wedding tackle? How does that work? How do you reconcile the one with the other? We're going to call the first thing a crime and the second one healthcare? Seriously? We're going to prosecute the tattoo guy to the fullest extent of the law while the Frankenstein doctor who mutilates children for a living gets a big freaking mansion and a fancy car and the approbation and admiration of his colleagues? That is the set of moral standards that we've built for ourselves as Americans of the 21st century. I can't speak for anybody else, but that makes me feel deeply ashamed. We are failing our children, and we are failing them very horribly. And look, I'm not a big fan of street protests, generally speaking, but I think this is a case where an exception can be made. Any hospital or clinic that is performing cosmetic surgeries on the sex organs of healthy children, it should have protesters outside its door 24 hours a day. And I'd be fine with publicly exposing the names of the doctors involved, too. Because I don't consider such people doctors. When they gave you your medical degree, you took a solemn oath. The first component of which was to say, I will do no harm. But there you are. You're doing harm. You're doing severe harm to some of the most vulnerable people among us. You are selling gender-affirming care as an easy ticket to happiness. But you know that's a damnable lie. You got into this field of medicine because you saw that it was fashionable. You saw that there was a whole crapload of money to be made. But what you do is not health care. You play Mr. Potato Head with actual human bodies. The bodies of children, no less. Not only do you have no business practicing medicine, you have no business being a free man. You should be in freaking prison. Prison is where we put people who inflict monstrous tortures upon minor children under the color of authority. And it looks like that double digression took up the whole rest of the episode, didn't it? And now I don't have the faintest idea what to title the video, but I am sure I will come up with something obnoxious. Also, I promise to do my best to remain awake for the premiere tonight. I know that I've been falling short in that department recently, but I promise to do better. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow. I will see you Friday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.